The mountains are beautiful, but they can be incredibly brutal. In this video, I'll be sharing 3 true stories of people who were able to survive certain death in the mountains. These stories are amazing, so stay tuned. What's going on, guys? My name's Derek, and I've got 3 jaw-dropping survival stories on the menu today. But really quick, before we get into those, this channel is dedicated to all kinds of crazy stories that are true. If that sounds interesting, and why wouldn't it, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell, and join me each week for new unbelievable stories. Alright, let's jump into the first story. Joe Simpson and Simon Yates were 2 mountain climbers that met in 1984 and connected over their love of mountain climbing. In 1985, a year after they met, they came up with a very ambitious but risky idea. They were going to be the first people to reach the top of the Siula Grande. The mountain is in the Peruvian Andes, and its peak summit is 21,000 feet. Not only was this going to be an extremely long climb up, but the 2 were going to have to deal with the challenging terrain and the unpredictable weather of the Andes. But they were totally game, and they set out on a beautiful day to begin their climb. They began climbing on the west side of the mountain. They knew as they climbed that they had no room for error. This mountain had its own unique challenges, which is why no one had successfully reached its summit. Well, they were able to finally scale 4,500 feet and reach the summit of the west face. They had accomplished their goal of making it to the top, and now they were ready to start their descent and get their feet safely back on the ground. At some point during the descent, Joe fell and broke his leg. This presented an entirely new challenge for both Joe and Simon. Joe's injury was now a huge liability for the 2 of them, and Simon was left having to lower Joe the rest of the way down. To make matters worse, a blizzard began. Visibility was much lower and the temperatures dropped even more. They slowly worked through all of these conditions in the dark. Simon's fingers were frostbitten, and he was doing his best to continue safely lowering Joe. He lowered him 300 feet at a time through storms and avalanches. Neither Joe nor Simon could see very well, and they were far enough apart that it was hard for them to see each other and even hear each other. Still in the dark, Simon lowered Joe over a cliff edge, not realizing it until Joe was left dangling over a crevasse. The snowsuit that Simon was using for leverage began to collapse. That left Simon with a difficult decision he needed to make very quickly: hold on and risk going over the edge with Joe to both of their deaths, or use his knife and cut the rope. Simon reached in his pack and pulled out a knife, which ironically was Joe's knife, and cut the nylon rope. This sent Joe falling 100 feet into the crevasse below. Though it was a very difficult decision, Simon knew he needed to cut the rope so that they both wouldn't die. He also followed the code of climbing, which is that if you can't save the other climber, save yourself. Simon was trying to think of how he was going to tell Joe's friends and family about what happened and the decision he made. The rest of the way down, he struggled with feelings of guilt and the reality of this situation. But here's something incredible. When the rope was cut and Joe was sent plummeting, he survived the 100-foot fall. He was incredibly lucky because had he fallen a few feet to the side, he would have disappeared into a dark abyss. Instead, he fell into the crevasse and dug himself an ice cave to shelter in till the storm passed. He then went 3 days without food and water, and even though he was severely injured, he was able to crawl back to base camp for help. He ended up having to undergo several surgical operations as a result of his leg injuries. He was told that he would never be able to climb again, and that he'd also have difficulty walking for the rest of his life. Amazingly, 2 years after rehabilitation, he was back to mountain climbing. So I know you're wondering what Simon's reaction was when he found out Joe was alive. He was in disbelief that Joe had survived the fall and was able to crawl his way to help. When Simon and Joe saw each other for the first time after all of this had happened, Simon couldn't believe what Joe said to him. Joe thanked him for cutting the rope and told him that he did the right thing, noting that they both likely would have died if he didn't. Joe told Simon that he made one mistake that day, which was that Simon should have left him as soon as he had broken his leg. Fortunately, this story had a good outcome. Lincoln Hall was a mountain climber from Australia. He had many years of experience and always had a goal of making it to the top of Mount Everest. In 2006, he decided he was going to try and climb the tallest mountain on Earth. Later that year, he made it to the starting point and was ready to begin his ascent. Lincoln and everyone in the group he was with successfully made it to the summit. There were no major problems, and it didn't appear that there would be any on the way down. After starting the descent, Lincoln began experiencing really intense altitude sickness. This made him confused of his surroundings and what was going on, and caused him to hallucinate. He was having trouble staying with the group and the Sherpa guides. He frequently wandered away from everyone and was starting to become a burden and liability. At some point during the descent, he wandered far enough away from the group that they lost sight of him, and he became completely lost. The guides realized that Lincoln wasn't with the group, and they began searching for him. They searched for hours, but they had no choice to abandon the search and continue on. Oxygen supplies were limited, and the guides needed to make sure they were able to get the rest of the group back down to safety. After the group made it back down, a statement was released to Lincoln's friends and family announcing his death. With him wandering off with no oxygen, food, or shelter, the guides knew he wouldn't have been able to survive very long. Well, the following morning, another group had started their ascent up the mountain. Along the way, they came across a partially frozen man walking very slowly down the mountain. Surprisingly, he was still alive and had survived a bitter cold night with basically nothing. One of the members of the group that was named Miles said that they saw a man that was sitting about 2 feet from a 10,000-foot drop. He was sitting with his legs crossed and was in the process of changing his shirt. He wasn't wearing a hat or gloves, he had no sunglasses or oxygen mask, no regulator, ice axe, sleeping bag or mattress, and also had no food or water. Well, this man was Lincoln, and after Lincoln saw this group approaching him, he said to them that he imagined they were surprised to see him there. Surprised is an understatement. The entire group was in complete disbelief. Miles said in his own words, "Here is a gentleman, apparently lucid, that spent the night without oxygen at 8,600 meters, without proper equipment, and barely clothed, and alive." Miles and the rest of the group didn't continue up the mountain. They stayed with Lincoln until rescue arrived. 12 guides were immediately dispatched, and Miles stayed with Lincoln until the guides found them. The guides took Lincoln to a nearby base camp where he was treated. The following day, Lincoln was taken to an advanced base camp and then to a hospital. Surprisingly, he was in good shape, considering he shouldn't have survived on the mountain. Because of frostbite, Lincoln lost the tips of all of his fingers and one toe. Other than that, he had no lasting effects and completely recovered. Colby Coombs always bounced from one mountain adventure to the next. In 1992, he decided he was going to try and make it to the top of Mount Foraker in Alaska. The day he set out to do this, he had 2 friends come along with him, Tom Walter and Rick Kellogg. The climb started out really well. The weather was nice, and there had been no accidents or injuries. However, the weather shifted as they got closer to a cliff band. The wind began picking up and visibility worsened. Tom was leading the climb and Colby was connected to him. Colby felt the rope become loose and then looked up to see a huge amount of snow smash him in the face. Well, you guessed it, it was an avalanche, and he began sliding down the mountain really fast. He was trying to self-arrest by sticking his ice pick in the snow, but then he hit something and went flying through the air. That's the last thing he remembered before passing out. He woke up 6 hours later and realized he was even further down the mountain. He was dangling from his rope and was in excruciating pain. He also realized his backpack was gone. Not too far from him, Colby saw his friend Tom. He knew that Tom was dead because Tom's face was frozen to the point that he couldn't even make out his features. He was able to make his way over to a ledge and find Tom's sleeping bag. He got inside and went to sleep for the night. What Colby didn't know was that he had suffered a severe concussion. By going to sleep when he did, he could have possibly never woken up. But when he did wake up, he lowered himself to a bigger ledge. On the ledge, he found the deceased body of his other friend, Rit. For the next 2.5 days, he spent time resting and recovering so he'd be able to make the rest of the climb down. He also tried to find crucial equipment he needed that had been scattered by the snow. When he was ready to continue down the mountain, he ended up on a route that he wasn't familiar with. For the next 6 days, he slowly worked his way down. He was still in excruciating pain, and he would stop and rest. He would also melt snow so that he could stay hydrated. At some point on his way back down, he slipped and was forced to grab onto a rock with one arm. That normally wouldn't have been much of a deal, but he was suffering from a broken shoulder blade and all of his body weight was on that arm. He was able to continue on and kept telling himself that he needed to just keep going. Eventually, he made his way over by an airstrip, and that's where a search plane saw him and he was rescued. He had broken his shoulder blade and ankle, and also had 2 fractures in his neck. Amazingly, he didn't experience any frostbite. He spent 3 months in the hospital and then 3 more months on crutches and made a full recovery. That wraps up the stories for this episode. Which story do you think was the craziest? Tough choice, but let me know in the comments. Thanks for dropping in, and don't forget to subscribe so you can join me for more crazy and true stories. If you liked this video, hit the like button and share it with someone. Also, if you have a story suggestion, drop it in the comments. Until next time, have fun and stay safe.